rushing seas leap everywhere about me. They cannot harm or make my heart afraid. Be with me, Lord, no other gift or blessing Thou couldst bestow could with this one compare. A constant sense of Thy abiding presence, where'er I am, to feel that Thou art near. Be with me, Lord, when loneliness o'ertakes me, when I must weep amid the fires of pain, and when shall come the hour of my departure for worlds unknown. O Lord, be with me then. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. They're all expecting me, and that's one thing I know. My Savior pardoned me, and now I onward go. I know He'll take me through, though I am weak and poor, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in glory land we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Their song of sweetest praise drifts back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of Him in glory will the toils of life repay. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Onward to the prize before us, soon His beauty will behold. Soon the pearly gates will open, we shall tread the streets of gold. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. awesome God, He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
He bore it all that I might
In His presence
live.
live. My precious Savior suffered pain and agony. He bore it
Freely bore it all.
that I might live.
I with Him might live.
He broke the bonds of sin and set the captive free.
He bore it all that I might
In His presence
live.
live. He bore it
Jesus
all
bore
that
it
I
all.
might see His
See His shining face. He bore it
Freely bore it all.
all that I might
I with Him might
live.
live. I stood
condemned to die.
but Jesus
Freely took my place. He bore it all that I might
in His presence
live.
live. They placed a crown of thorns upon my Savior's head. He bore it
Freely bore it all.
that I might
I with Him might live.
by cruel man with spear, His side was pierced and bled.
He bore it all that I might
In His presence
live.
live. He bore it
Jesus
all
bore
that
it
I
all.
might see His
See His shining face. He bore it
Freely bore it all.
all.
We introduced Judges last week, kind of got into it. We're not deep diving in every, this isn't that kind of a study, or we're looking at necessarily every verse of every chapter. We're not spending a lot of time on every historical location, so there'll be places that we'll mention that we won't spend any time unless we think it's significant to what we kind of want to draw out. So we don't want to have that kind of a deep dive study. We talked a little about this last week, and I don't want to get into this. Chapter 3, I really want to look at that, about God leaving the nations in the land. We kind of talked about that a little bit last week. There was a purpose for that. It was a test. Judges 3 and verse 1 tells us. And God has always tested his people. But the people in the land were wicked. They were vile. Historians, scholars have no argument there that the Canaanite people during this time were a grossly immoral, evil society. And that's been confirmed through just various studies. Richard Dawkins, other well-known atheists, have acknowledged that point, that these were some of the worst people that's ever lived. And so that was a threat to God and his purposes, but God gave them time to repent. God gave opportunity, but he does not leave the sins unpunished. And so there is a day of judgment, and that came for the people of Canaan. They had their opportunity, just like the citizens of Jericho and Rahab, to hear the word, hear what God has done, and to turn to him. But of course, that's not what's going to happen, and that will ensue the conquest of driving the people out. And they do that mostly sort of enough to get in the land and get settled. And as they divide among the 12 tribes their portions of the land, each tribe now has their territory where they have to fight. Now here's the problem. What happens, we've seen this when any organization, any sporting team, when people have great success and they think they've won, what do they often do? It's hard to repeat, isn't it, as a champion, right? Repeats are hard. In NFL, three-peats are just, they don't happen. So it's hard. You get settled, you get complacent. And another thing, before we get on them too hard, they're farmers. They got to get to work. So they got to, God's always, I'm going to give it, but he also says you got to what? You got to work. And so it's kind of like someone hires you and says, I've given you a job. Now you got to go to work, right? But you're thankful for what? For that opportunity and so God has done that. So now they got to be farmers. They got to grow their land. They got to grow their tribe. But while doing that, they also have a responsibility, because not all the nations are what? Are gone. They're hanging around the camps, around where the tribes are at. And God, Judges 3, God, we'll talk about next. God said, I did that on purpose to test you. Now, God's always been about testing, hasn't he? Right? And again, we'll talk about that a little bit. Maybe we'll get into, but he's always big on that. Will you believe me? Will you trust me? Will you be faithful? Easy in the good times. What about when things get tough? And so we talked about that. Again, remember we talked about the cycles of Judges. So over this 400-year period, they'll be faithful. God's blessing them. But they forget God. They will fall into idolatry and sin. God, as he said in the law of Moses, I will raise up your enemies and oppress you. And the people, that's what happened. And the people cry out to the Lord. They turn to God, they repent. God raises up a judge. These are military leaders mostly, that will lead them and deliver them over their enemies. And then there's peace in the land until that judge dies. And then what happens? They go along for a while and they forget God, and it's just the cycle, 400 years almost of this. Over and over again, you see that. Now remember, I'm not going back to Deuteronomy again. We did it last week. But do you remember he outlines these 5 keys that they have to do in their responsibilities: to love God, keep the law with all their heart, teach it to their children, be thankful to God. Remember, God gave you this land that's bountiful. Worship me and me only, and drive out the nations. That's big. Those are the 5 things. And we kind of said, That's exactly what God requires of us. Love God with our heart, soul, mind, right? Strength. Teach our children. Remember to live in gratitude to God. Be a people who are in devotion and praise to Him. And we'll talk about this. We're not physically at war with other nations, but spiritually we're in a battle against spiritual darkness and not flesh and blood and using the weapons of this world, but of taking captive those things that come up against God and His will. So that's pretty much what the responsibilities we have today. And if we do that, God will, He'll bless us. Okay, just a little quick again, before we get a little bit in Judges 1 here and maybe get into 2. This period takes place around 1450 BC till about 110 with the death of Samuel. And Samuel then will usher in, he will anoint, remember, Saul and King David. And so, anyway, and then Judges 2 kind of steps back and shows us, kind of goes back in time in the years before Joshua's death to explain the moral state of Israel. And we kind of mentioned that last time, but we'll come back. The first part of Judges 1 describes some of the military victories. So they start out fine, actually, we'll see. Specifically in the land that belongs to Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. But the second part tells us that the pagan nations are there and they did not, the Israelites did not drive them out. And that is going to be their Achilles heel, their thorn in the flesh. That's going to be their downfall. And so that's what we see here in this. Judges chapter 1 here. I just want you a couple of things here. Let's look through here. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, who of us is to go up first to fight against the Canaanites? The Lord answered, Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hands. And the men of Judah then said to the Simeonites, their fellow Israelites, come up with us into the territory allotted to us to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn, notice this, we in turn will go with you into yours. So God says, the people say, who of us is to go up and fight against the Canaanites? And the Lord says, all right, here's how we're going to do it. Judah. That's right, Judah. Special tribe. It's significant to the Lord for reasons you know from connecting to Christ. But and then the tribe of Simeon here, and then later the Benjamites are going to have success. What do you notice there in verse? Did you catch that in verse 3? What do you see there at the end of verse 3? What they say to each other. I like that. What do you see? Cooperation. What's the other words we'd call that? Unity. What else? I mean, what they say? What's they say? What do they say to each other?
Judah says to Simeon and his brother, that we may fight against the Canaanites. I have likewise will go with you to your allotted territory.
Yeah. So what's that saying? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Okay. I mean, it's some of that in there. We're in this together, aren't we? We're brothers. We're fellow Israelites. We all have the same objective and goal to be faithful to God. We mentioned cooperation, I think. I need help doing this. And so you see this great unity that existed here in these tribes that we're in this together. We need to help each other keep the covenant. That's a larger principle, isn't it? That's not just for the church. I think it's good for a nation, right? I mean, this is our nation. We ought to work together regardless of our differences and different backgrounds. And if we don't, united we stand, what? Divided we fall. You know that. Happens, and the history books are just filled with it. And it's the, and they start out with some unity. And so, now, verse 4, the book of Judges is not PG. You cannot make the book of Judges into a movie and get a PG rating. We don't get 4 chapters in. Judah attacks. By the way, remember this, the Lord gave. I'm giving you the land. Well, I'm giving this to you. I'm giving you the... But they got to what? Fight. You got to be faithful. Someone says, I'm just sitting here just waiting for God to do it all. No, now. Trust God, and He'll provide, but that's faith is our part. By faith, the walls of Jericho. By faith, Abraham. By faith, Moses. The action. But the walls of Jericho, they could have marched till God did it, right? But they had to be faithful. And so it's the same here. So they go up against the Perizzites and the Canaanites, and they struck down 10,000 men. Bezak, and they fought against him, and they chased them. He cut off their thumbs, their big toes. That goes back to some justice that came to this tribe, came to this people in Canaan that had done similar acts. But yeah, they cut off. There you go, verse 6. Cut off their thumbs and their toes. 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them. See? They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. And so the men of Judah attacked Jerusalem also and took it. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. You say, wait a minute, that's Jerusalem, God's holy city. No, not yet. It's not. It's just a city in pagan territory. It's being taken. It's not going to fully be taken and conquered until David comes, right? And then he will take that and conquer that area and subdue it, and of course make it the capital that we know of. And of course the temple will be built. But and so you see that in here. They go down, advance in verse 9. They go down further in the western foothills and advance against some of the Canaanites. Verse 12, Caleb says, I'll give my daughter in marriage to the man who attacks and captures this particular area. Caleb's younger brother took it. So Caleb gave his daughter to him in marriage. And so you see Othniel will come back to him. He's the first judge. And so you see the skip down there a little bit down. And again, verse 19, Judah's having success with the Simeonites. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill. But they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had chariots, notice, fitted with what? What's it say there? Iron. It says there in verse 19, my translation says unable. It's really not a good translation. The Hebrew word really has an idea of unwilling. They were unwilling. Why were they unwilling? It tells us why. Because they had what? Armed chariots. They got horses, or whatever they got, the Israelites, they got armed chariots. Now, you would think, though, who should be the deciding factor in the Israelites' mind? They've got armed chariots, but we have who? We have God. Right? But that's not how they think about it. They think, well, wait a minute, we don't want to go up against them. So, hey, we got them out of here. We pushed them out.
They let their physical serpents
Yeah.
Circumstances overcome the
Yeah.
spiritual.
Yeah, and again, we do that, right?
Yeah.
We do that all the time. And so they left them there, and Benjamites did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. The tribe of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And so you kind of you keep reading through here verse 27, Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan. And so you kind of start to see that. They don't fully do what God tells them to do. They're disobedient here. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites, but the Canaanites continued to live there among them. Neither did Zebulun, so let's get them all in here. All 12 of these tribes are not doing it. And they're leaving some of them in the land. Neither did Naphtali, verse 33. Let's not get Naphtali in there. They didn't leave them. They didn't drive them out. And so the Amorites, all these ites, they just continue to be there. And they're going to begin to oppress them. And so you see there the tribe of Joseph was forced into labor. And so you're going to begin to start to see the oppression that will start happening slowly. It just didn't happen overnight, but it's going to begin to, the enemies of Israel in the land are going to begin to oppress them and cause them trouble. You get over in chapter 2 here, I want you to notice just a couple of things here. Judges gives us a little bit of why this happened. Look down at verse 6. After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the elders who outlived him, and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. They buried him there. Verse 10, after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, here we go, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. How can that happen? How can that happen? What do we see? One of the 5, what? Was the key, one of those was what? Teach your children. Why do we forget?
Well, we see that right here in America, right?
Well, yeah.
We have a lot of people, the younger generation don't understand what the Constitution is. They don't understand, they don't understand how some things work.
Yeah. We see that as a nation. We've seen that. Freedom is not to serve my own selfish, and it's a freedom to do right, to be a blessing to my community, and not self-serving, to just and we see that in our nation. And then spiritually, we see it in churches, we see it in religion, Christianity, if you specifically we think about, and they didn't teach, they didn't model. It just happens slowly over time. Again, when we read these stories, we have to think 400 years. 400 years. This is a slow, even in these little pockets, 40 years, 20, 40 years. A lot can happen in 20, 40 years, in 20 to 40 years.
Well, a lot happened from one generation to the next according to this
Yeah.
verse.
Yeah, so much so that it says what? Not only did they forget God, the Israelites did evil. They kind of go together. When you turn from God and forget God, see, you don't just give up something, do you? You embrace something else. You fill the void. Nature abhors a vacuum, right? There's nothing that just stays empty. Something will go in there and fill it up. So historically, we as a nation have been a God-fearing nation, and it doesn't mean we're perfect and we don't have, but, you know, and so we've cast off the last whatever, you know, and we're very secular, and we've been that way for, well, something has filled that void. And it's been all the things, of course, we've seen the last 40, 50, 60 years, especially in this country. And so that's right. They did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals, because when you give up worshiping God, you're going to turn to another god, right? Gods. You're going to. We talked about that last week. We don't have physical temples, so to speak, like they had with their idolatry, but we have things that we bow down and serve and give our devotion to, and that's the same with us. And that they did that, and they served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the peoples around them. By the way, let's go back to the Canaanites. The sexual immorality was bad, and you know, we know that's a great temptation, and so God. That was one reason why God specifically, you know, among others, but that's always been a great allurement. And so, and their gods and their worship would be filled with that sort of immorality, and their prostitutes that would be in the temples. I mean, we know that. But later, we know that throughout the history and the Roman history. It was there as well in the first century. And so, anyway, they aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served the Baal and the Asherah. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them. Now look at that verse. If you're an Israelite, a Hebrew, and you hear the word sold, first of all, you go back to Joseph, right? That's where it all gets started. His brothers did what? Sold him. He ends up in where? Now, he rises up eventually, but then what? A new Pharaoh, what? Who does not know, remember, and what does he do to the people? He enslaves them. God then raises up Moses to what? Deliver them and lead them into the what? And now, because they're unfaithful and they turn from God and they do the very thing God said don't do, God sold them. I don't know if that, to me, that's one of those highlight mark in your Bible. God sold them because they forsook him in his anger. They're in verse 14. And so, you know, Paul would say something similar in the ancient world. What God would do in the ancient world, God would give them up. God would hand them over. And it's almost like it's this way. God saying, you want it? Here you go. And what does God know sin will do to us? Corrupt, but what's Jesus talk about? What is sin? It enslaves what? Enslaves us. We become what to it? A slave. What's that mean? You do what your flesh wants, what your desires want. You don't control them. They what? It's kind of like living the Christian life and being faithful to the end. We can't do it without the Spirit. You cannot live the Christian life apart from God's help, God's strength, God's leading, God's guidance. And Israel can't do it without God, and so they choose to not do it with God. They choose to give themselves over, and God says, have at it. You know, that's his punishment, if you will. That's his holy, righteous anger. That's a temperate anger. That's not a flying off the handle in rage. That's God's righteous response, indignation to sin. And he has to punish, and he will not ignore that. And he chooses in this case to give them what they want. You want to serve the gods? You want to serve these idols? Well, guess what? They're going to enslave you. You're going to serve them. And so Israel would, whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. And they were in great distress. And so then the Lord, verse 16, the Lord raised up judges, and that's back to our cycle now. Now you got the cycle of the judges. And this will continue for, over this 400-year period in this regard. So we kind of I just wanted you to see a little bit. Really, chapter 1 and 2 is just kind of like the setup. The real story begins in chapter 3. That's when these stories really start. Chapter 1 and 2 is kind of all to set everything up in the book. How we got there. How we got here. And so that's what chapter 1 and 2 is really doing, is showing how they're going to get here and what happened. And it will begin in chapter 3 that we'll see next time. Now let me say this. As we being a follower of Jesus isn't easy, is it? And like I said, God gave them the land, but then God said you got to be faithful, you got to be obedient, you got to drive out the nations, you've got to teach your children, you've got to worship me, you've got to be devoted to me. I mean, that's not always easy, is it? Especially when we're in a culture that is with flashing neon lights say, oh, don't do that, right? Don't deny yourself. Give yourself whatever you want. It's hard to be faithful. It's not easy. When there's the influences of the world around us, when there's trials, and they gave up the promised land, basically, didn't they? For their desires, for their fleshly desires, for their convenience, whatever we might say, they gave up the promised land. It's no different than a Christian, right? Who gives up, they give up heaven, they give up the glory of God. And that's something that, the Bible constantly tells us about, that, the glory of the reward and what you're going to have far outweighs any of the testing or the trials. And again, God will help us. He'll preserve us. He'll lead us. He'll give us the strength to overcome. He expects us to push through. He expects us to be faithful, but He'll give us the strength. He'll be with us each step of the way. And God was going to be, He always tells Israel, I'll be with you. I'll go before you. I will drive out the nations. I will bless you. Anybody that comes against you will be defeated. I mean, God, again, doesn't mean they don't have to be faithful and fight and plow the land and work the soil and till the ground and the oxen. And I mean, they're going to have to work, but God will give the increase. God will cause them to prosper. And so that's the same thing with us. We've got to push through the hardship. And I think, just as a preview, again, look at chapter 3. It's a verse that we probably, need to think about. These are the nations the Lord left to test all those Israelites who had not, look at this, who had not experienced any of the wars. So let's in Canaan. So the Israelites, it says, when in the days of Joshua and all the elders that followed, for that whole generation, everything was what? Peace, great. So that generation grew up, and they didn't know really about war, did they? He did this to only teach warfare to the descendants of the Israelites who had not previously had battle experience. So God did this as a test. And that's the same with us. He wants our faith to be strong. He wants it to be complete. And He knows that we're going to have to be tested. It's going to have to go through trials. and or it's not real, it's not genuine, it won't be authentic, it won't last. And so, you see that there in chapter 3 as it kind of begins slowly, telling us about this cycle of these judges and this oppression, that God was doing this to try to get them battle tested and ready. And the only question is, are they going to pass the test? And more often than not, they're just not going to. And so, again, what we know in the New Testament is we're in a spiritual battle. And we have to be tested and tried, and we have to go through hardships and difficult days. And this makes our faith strong. Have some of you had those days? Have you went through those times in your life? Some of you are going right now through some of those. If you notice, our prayer list was kind of heavy, a little heavy. It was, hospice, and this and that. I mean, it's tough. And God's going to be here with us. And we're going to hold on to Him and be faithful. But it's not easy when we're in the battle. And that's not even talking about the spiritual battle that we're in. I'm just now moving over to that application of the culture and the war that we're in spiritually for the minds and hearts and the souls of people. Any thoughts, comments on that, just kind of as an intro? I didn't want to launch too far into chapter 3 as far as getting into the... read chapter 3 and look at these first 3 judges that we find. And I want you to think about this question. We'll come back to it. What has God equipped me? How has God gifted me, prepared me to accomplish His purposes? He's using me to accomplish His purposes. One of those judges He's going to use is a left-handed guy. It comes from a tribe of left. Now, we're not sure. We'll talk about that, the Hebrew. Did they have a damaged, was one of their arm, was the left arm damaged? Was it something that was kind of, a mark of that tribe? Was it, hereditary? Was it genetics? We're not, but my point is, one of those guys is a blacksmith, and one of those guys comes from a great line of family of fighters, Othniel. Look down there at chapter 3. The younger brother of Caleb. Was Caleb a fighter? Was Caleb a go-getter? Yeah, he was. Remember in his old age, he said, hey, Lord promised me some allotment. I want to go get it and defeat the Canaanites that are up there. And he went up and did that in his old age. And so this is his younger brother. So just think about what has God used, how has God prepared you to accomplish His purposes. We see that with, I think, in some of this with these judges. So we'll pick up there, read through chapter 3, and we'll try to get chapter 3 done. We will get chapter 3 done. I don't want to start on Deborah next week, so we'll just probably do just chapter 3. All right. Glad you guys are here this evening.